And I welcome all of you, particularly the commissioners. And I'm calling this public hearing to order at 5 p.m. in accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order, which suspends certain provisions of the open meeting law. We are conducting this meeting online to ensure public access to the discussions of the Boston Human Rights Commission. The public may access this call through telephone or video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to provide comments at the end. So when we get there, we will let you know. And I'd like to just take a minute and ask the commissioners just to introduce yourself, just your name, so people will recognize you as we go through the meeting. Ben, why don't we start with you? You are on the left side of my.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where I show up in Hollywood Squares there. I'm Ben Goldberger, and just because the open meeting lawyer is not here yet, Madam Chair, I think you need to announce that the meeting is being recorded.
The meeting is being recorded.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Okay, Robert.
Hi, Robert McEachran.
Okay, Anne.
Anne Rousseau.
Okay. Leslie. You're blacked. You're unmute. Want to unmute the.
I just unmuted. Okay, there it is.
Jeffrey Harris, Commissioner.
All right.
And Reyes Conte Chair.
Reyes. Did I miss anybody? And Evandro and Susan, introduce yourselves.
Make sure my video, can you see me and hear me? I'm Evandro Carvalho. I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director of the Boston Human Rights Commission.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Helmy. I'm the Executive Assistant of the Boston Human Rights Commission.
Okay. All right, and I'm Margaret McKenna. Welcome to everybody. And it looks like Yusefi, we're moving you down the agenda again, and we're going to ask, Evandro, why don't you introduce our guest?
Sure, Yusefi.
The lawyer is here now, right?
Yes, Nyla's here too, so what do we do?
I suggest we do the legal training first.
Let's do the legal training. Okay, Nyla, can you hear me? To make sure that, so let's see if I mute her. She's there, right? So she's having connection issues.
Yes, unmute her.
Let's see, unmute audio. Yeah, I tried a couple times.
I did too. Oh,
can she unmute herself?
She should be able to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so if you don't mind.
Oof.
Now we can't hear you. You disappeared. We can see you, but we can't hear you. We know you're talking.
There we go.
Chat it so we at least have.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm dialed in right now. Can we take me off the computer and I will just speak through the phone because I'm going to keep cutting in and out. I have very poor connection, it seems.
Okay, so I will withdraw you as co-host.
Okay.
She should be removed.
I still see her, so.
Jose, can we get started? Nyla, can you get started? Can you?
See.
Otherwise, if we can't get this technology straightened out, we'll go to Yusefi.
I think she's frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's frozen.
Yeah, she's gone, right?
All right, well, this is why you have to always practice technology ahead of time, even in 2020. So while she's trying to figure it out, we're back to you. Not that you're second place ever in our hearts and minds, but you are very reliable.
COVID has taught us all about technology, and
I know.
it's also taught us how frail technology is. So.
I know. So we welcome you, the Director of the Mayor's Office on Immigrant Advancement. And it's a pleasure to have you here. One of the first thing the mayor said, and when putting up this commission, he was very committed to immigrant rights, and for us to pay particular attention to this as an issue. And so I'm very interested in hearing what you think are the major issues. What do you think are the gaps in terms of where we could play a role, either in education, information, enforcement, what that other people are not doing, either that you can't do, or fair housing people aren't doing. We really look to you for your advice and guidance here. You've been doing this quite a while, in different capacities. So we're really pleased you're here, and I really see you as an expert. So I'm really glad that you're joining us.
Well, pleasure to be here, Madam Chair, and really a pleasure to be here with all the commissioners. Yeah, happy to have this conversation. I will say that I think this is going to be a process where we're all going to figure this out together. And so I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in it, but I'm happy to share a little bit about where I think the commission could play an important role, and where I see some gaps in terms of the immigrant side of things. And feel free to ask me any questions around this. So I see that there are kind of three real clear areas where potentially the commission, or where at least I see gaps. And so the first area is around consumer equity issues. What I mean by that is precisely what, Madam Chairwoman, you would identify in the last meeting, which was issues around internet access, right? And why aren't companies providing access to certain neighborhoods? And why are they, why in other areas? So that disparity, I think, is potential. Another example of that is food deserts, right? Why are certain grocery stores in certain areas versus others? Another piece of that is these check cashing companies versus banks. And so I just feel like you all have a really interesting potential role in bringing some of these companies to the table, for hearing and pointing out these issues. So that's one area. The other clear area that I hear on a regular basis pre-COVID is wage theft. And when in fact, Executive Director Carvalho and I spoke to Natalicia Tracy at the Brazilian Workers Center, and she had brought up the issue of wage theft to us about 3 months ago. And could the city play a bigger role in that? And I think those are stories that we hear very regularly. So I think that's another area, and I think that could be a focus. You could think about it, worker rights and wage theft, because right during COVID in particular, access to PPE is also sometimes a challenge, and the rights of workers and protections for workers being respected. The third area I could see is around access to certain public goods. So access to transportation, access to green spaces, that could be another area of potential focus. Now, when I said about the consumer equity issues, there are certain departments that are working on pieces of that, right? But I think there's a way to be in real partnership with those departments to then use the power of the commission to call certain companies, etc., to the table for a hearing that, frankly, shines a light on them and gets them to move on pieces. So on the internet piece, for instance, Duet has an individual that works on this particular issue. And so I just wonder, with the individual that you had last week who had put that map up, which is really interesting, working with our Duet person and then working with you all, could there be a really interesting way of highlighting that issue and bringing the right companies to the table? So those are some of the areas that my team and I identified could be places where you kind of lean into, and would frankly not only help our immigrant population, but also our African American population, which is what's kind of unique about, I think, some of those areas.
Yeah. So let me open this up to the commissioners for questions. I have a few, but let me defer to you first. So who has a question?
When you say wage theft, is there a particular industry where that's more common than others?
Restaurant industry is a big one. The other places, the cleaning. So particularly we hear in some of our cases, we get it from the Brazilian community, those that go into homes and clean. That can sometimes be another area. Of course, this wouldn't necessarily be for homes as much as, for companies that, hire folks to clean. Those are the two areas that we've really heard it come up. So.
Okay. Anyone else here?
Mentioned check cashing places and the financial industry. Is there anybody in the city that is working on connecting unbanked people with resources?
Under Chief Linehan's office, there is the economic mobility team there had been working on this issue. So I think Chief Linehan is the right person to also bring into that conversation. And she's the chief of policy.
Oh, you mean Joyce Linehan?
Yes, Joyce.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Is there an issue between immigrants that might not have a social security number or their ability to open up a bank account? Is that why they're using check cashing places?
No, it's so because we have been talking to a number of folks, during the COVID crisis who've been interested in cash assistance, direct cash assistance. And it turns out actually a number of undocumented immigrants are able to have bank accounts. And of course, some people are very fearful and just won't. But I actually don't think that's tied necessarily to that.
I think perhaps another layer for that is that immigrants often are sending money back to their country. And that's the space where money orders, you can go. So they're familiar, I guess, with those, with that industry, right? Oftentimes it'll be next to a bank, but, they'll hire local people, they'll speak the language, and, you can go and send money. I know a lot of my family send money to Cape Verde and such. So I think part of why that industry becomes close to them is that too, that you can send money for folks back home to pick up. So that's just my sense of what's going on there as well.
But banks charge so many fees.
Yeah.
And if you're not making much money, it costs you, a couple of bucks to cash a check, but in the bank, it costs even more. So we need to figure out how to get those fees down for people with low income.
So my experience with this comes from another life I had, one of the other lives I've had, which is in other parts of the country, every other corner is a check cashing store. And their fees are outrageous.
Yeah.
next to a bank. Or, so I don't see those check cashing places. They're not very populated here in the city as much as they are in other parts of the country. So I didn't know this was as much of an issue as you're talking about. So why would a person who has a bank wouldn't go to a check cashing place, would they?
A person that, no.
So
But
unbanked, people who are unbanked.
Right. Yeah.
So they
Right.
need a place to go cash their checks. And if they don't have a bank account, they end up going to these check cashing places, which are expensive.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, I mean, I think it's just worth doing a little bit of study into, you know, what does that look like across
Right.
neighborhood in terms of where are banks located versus check cashing. You know, I think that analysis was just helpful, right?
So I had two questions. Is the consumer, you talked about the internet access, Duet was doing, who was doing work on this?
It's a woman named Jeanette. Let me just look her last name up.
In where? In what area? Oh, is she the person in the IT office?
Yes.
Yes, do
Okay.
it. Do it.
Okay.
Out of the IT office, and she's looking at the similar issue that we have, in a sense
Right.
of just internet divide, right? The lack of internet for some neighborhoods.
Right. Yeah, I have heard of her before. Okay.
Sorry,
then the other-
Ann Schwager. That's her name. I'm probably mispronouncing.
Right. Yeah.
I actually reached out to her about a week or two, and I believe she had just had a baby.
She's on maternity leave, yeah.
Right. So because I was just like, we're looking into this potentially, and she said she will get in touch, but she had just gone on maternity leave, so I didn't want to just come out and say let's meet next week. But I have made some contact with her.
Okay. All right. I was trying to connect Michael to her too. I know who put the map together last week. And the food desert issue, is there someone who's done a map of the food deserts in the area?
No, not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. It is something that we should talk to Catalina Lopez Espina on it. But I will tell you that I have a immigrant nonprofit that has continued to raise this. And actually, there was a story just a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember in which outlet, where this issue was raised as well. So, you know, that's and I was actually supposed to talk to them on Wednesday, and unfortunately that meeting got canceled. But I'm going to be talking to them in a week and a half, precisely because I want to learn a little bit more about this issue.
Okay. So that's something I'd love to know about. You know, in one of my other lives, I was the head of the Walmart Foundation. As Mayor Menino said, I was on the dark side because I worked for Walmart, you know, but Boston has been a city who has been hostile to big box stores, right?
Right.
And big grocers, even though they have a Shores and a Stop and Shop who are struggling now. And recently they opened the city to Targets that are not primarily grocery stores, they're primarily merchandise stores, where Walmart is primarily a grocery store that has merchandise. So it's an interesting, I'm curious about the city's stand on opening up to a big grocery store, not necessarily Walmart, but any big grocery store. They've been reluctant to do that. So I think it would be interesting to me to see if where the food deserts are, because I remember this in Chicago. There were huge food deserts in Chicago, and that issue was solved in Chicago. So that's something we should put on our list just to see, because I don't think that sort of surprised me. That sort of surprised me. So we have some following up to do there in terms of, and can I tell you something? Those stores, big stores, also cash checks for half of what a check cashing store will do. So that sort of goes together in some ways. Not that
You
we,
know, the other interesting thing or part of this conversation around the food piece is that um, actually, if I remember the story that I recently read about this was that there was also concern that fast food were in locations right outside of some of our BPS schools,
yeah,
right? And so it's also a question of the kind of access to food that our young
Yeah.
people are getting. So that there's another angle to this, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
absolutely. And we're not only talking about food, we're talking about healthy food at
exactly,
reasonable prices.
exactly.
Access to healthy food at reasonable prices. Well, okay, so a good start. And in a week or two, we'll have this all settled. It'll be fine. We'll fix it all.
Yeah, of course.
You and us, no problem. Other people have questions or comments? Anyone? I can't see, so I
I'll
can
make
see.
a quick comment.
Reyes.
Oh, Ray's
Yeah.
raising her hand. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yusufi, you have not mentioned issues with ICE.
Yes.
Say that again. I couldn't hear that.
You have not mentioned issues with ICE.
Oh, with ICE. Yes. Well, obviously the Trust Act was put in place, right, for us to limit our limit BPD's cooperation with ICE. I think as long as that piece gets implemented, which we were in the process of doing, obviously COVID has, made things just very difficult at this particular point. Actually, in many ways, COVID has stopped any kind of relationship there, which has been helpful and useful. I feel very good about that. The superintendent's working on Boston Police and the relationship around ICE, which I think is really important. So I don't know that there is as much work to do around that piece for the commission. Again, in my humble estimation, what I will say is that there's just a lot of fear among our undocumented population, and it impacts everything. And we were today on the Health Inequities Task Force, and we had a doctor, Altaf Sadi, come and speak to us about how she's seeing it in terms of her interaction with her immigrant patients, and how they're just afraid to use any of the services because they're afraid the information is going to get out, or because of the public charge issue. So that's I don't know, and you may have some ideas of how you may play a role in terms of that. But I couldn't think of a way where the Human Rights Commission could necessarily play a role in that, but would welcome your ideas. Maybe I'm missing something.
No, I think that it has to do, it might have to do a little bit with the fact that immigrants don't necessarily open up to official offices, as you were, pointing out to. What I do hear the most is that a lot of people in our communities live in terror. Mm-hmm. And that many of these issues, including the cashing the checks issues, stem precisely from the collaboration of Boston Police Department and ICE. Mm. And in some cases also landlords and landladies. So from the ground, I don't know what this commission can do to change this, but just the fact that we raise the issue and say we are looking at this sends a message to Boston Police Department and to ICE that the situation is, I don't want to finish my sentence because it's not going to be pretty. But the terror is real and it permeates everything. And I think some of the issues you have brought up are symptoms of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I think one of the things I've heard that was really sad was that immigrants would walk away from a food bank because there was a policeman standing there. What I do know about BPS is it's become very clear from the superintendent that the police in the schools are not to share any information without authorization from her. So that's the word that's gone down. And my understanding is since she's been there, it's happened once and that was the end. Now, if it's happening, if it is happening and anyone knows about it, it would be really good to let her know, because she is determined in this regard that that not happen.
Both of my sons are teachers, one at East Boston and one at Madison Park. East Boston is the school where the child got turned over to ICE.
Yeah.
And I believe that a teacher might have been involved in that.
Yeah.
You know, they have a problem with a kid, they
Yeah.
know their immigration status,
Yeah.
they call the police.
Yeah.
And then when I was sitting on the bench, the majority of my cases came from the schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, it's a real issue. So I'm glad to hear that the new superintendent is paying attention to this. But we got to make sure teachers don't use the police as their enforcement of
Yeah.
children for being children.
I know that there has been, or there is planned, a training for principals on this issue, that the police are not there to enforce discipline or to turn kids over into the police system. And she's very determined about that. And that, I know that was on the agenda. I don't know where it is, but that's something I know she was committed to, is that these kids, you know, years ago, if two kids got in a fight, you didn't end up in the system. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, people with guns and weapons, but, you know, 8-year-olds, you know. So she's determined that that not happen. And if it is happening, this is the kind of thing that sometimes doesn't get to the top. Mm-hmm. And so I think it is important that the public know that the superintendent is committed to that, to stopping any kind of activity like that. And she needs to know if it is still going on anywhere. So it's important.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, I just want to echo that in my conversations around the superintendent, which were very open around this issue as well, that's exactly what her intent is. And just so that everyone is aware, the superintendent is working hard to put the policy in place, and she's trying to do that with also the advocates at the table. And then, and the goal is to get the policy in place. And then, I mean, she's already started doing some of the trainings, but once the policy is in place, then really there can be some significant, you know, trainings happening. And to your point, Commissioner Harris, it needs to happen not just at the school police level, which is important, but it's really how do you get all these teachers, you know, to really appreciate and understand what the policy is. And I'll say this, I don't know that there are necessarily bad intentions on the teacher's side. It's more so just not often appreciating, right? Some teachers, of course, you always have some bad apples. I'm not saying that, but I think in many ways there's just not appropriate knowledge and understanding of these issues. So, and in my experience, you know, the majority of teachers are so empathetic and sympathetic, you know, to this issue. And there's the Unafraid Educators group, which is a part of the teachers union that's working very closely on these issues. But what I will say actually on this issue is something that we all should think about, is I think human rights, the word human rights and the Human Rights Commission has a level of trust that is different than government, than other parts of government, I should say. And so how is that leveraged? You know, and so maybe you do a review from time to time of the Trust Act, or, you know, other pieces, and put out a statement, because I do think that may be trusted, and will help us all move towards that goal of building trust between, you know, law enforcement, local law enforcement, and our immigrant population, and city, you know, and immigrant population. So it's certainly worth pointing out, and I really appreciate that, Commissioner Reyes, for you to point that out.
Yeah, very important. It's an interesting suggestion too. Appreciate it.
A space that we could potentially occupy to add value to this process. I've seen it happen. I did a little digging earlier on last year about this in California, San Francisco in particular. The local Human Rights Commission there enforces their Trust Act, in the sense that, you know, as I've heard, I think Margaret mentioning this, is if it happens, right, or when it happens, going along with what Yusuf is saying, is that because of the legitimacy of the word human rights, because of what a universal language, if almost any place of the world that you come from, there's a connection there, that if we find a way to open doors to say, okay, we want to know, right? If your child at school, this happened, if this happened on the road somewhere, we want to know. We almost, for lack of a better explanation, complaints. We take those complaints and obviously try to figure out what to do with them. In a sense, we discuss what that happens. Do we investigate? Do we push the city? Do we push PPD? Do we have a conversation with the superintendent about the incidents that happen? Because what we've seen over the years, in the last couple of years certainly, is that there'll be that one article that did this happen, whether it's at BPS or through a police officer and so, right? So to some extent, what I'm saying is that there's no, maybe Yusuf, you can pitch in and tell me if this is incorrect, but we're not saying, come tell us that this has happened. Where, if I'm, you know, someone who this happened to me with my child in school, where do I go, right? How do I tell the authorities that I'm already afraid of, right? Because police is already involved potentially and so on. So I think there's an angle there, and at least there's precedent of Human Rights Commission occupying that space where people feel comfortable coming in and saying, this happened to us.
Well, I actually think the suggestion about, you know, some review of the Trust Act is an interesting thing we should put on our list. Who does one go to if there's been a violation of the Trust Act? I suppose it depends what the violation is in what area. So it might be a little fuzzy about where you go, depending, I guess, on what it is. All right. Giuseppe, really appreciate your joining us. We look forward to working with you on these issues as well as on other issues, and we welcome you at any time. And as things come up where you think we could be helpful, do not hesitate. You've been giving us a lot of ideas today, and we really appreciate it. So thank you.
Likewise, feelings very mutual. And I will also say that I really hope you have Chief Caroline Crockett on at some time. And I know, I'm sure, you know, Executive Director Carvalho will make that happen, but she is, as they say, wicked smart. And and I also think she just have a really great insight, you know, for the commission as well. And I also think this is a really interesting moment, and this is something my department's thinking about, is to find some of the overlaps in the issues between the immigrant communities and the African-American communities.
Yeah.
And because you talk about police, for instance, you know, there's a really interesting overlap there, right? And so, so I also, for that reason, I also think, you know, Chief Crockett is positioned in a great way to be thinking about that, because she's got a number of cabinets that, you know, have an overlap of different issues. So thank you so much, and I'll stop talking.
Maybe tell people who she is.
What's that?
Why don't you tell people who Chief Crockett is?
Yeah, so Chief Crockett is the new chief for the Cabinet of Equity, and in this cabinet is five departments. The Human Rights Commission is part of that. The Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement is part of that. Women's Advancement is part of that. Race and Resiliency Department is part of that, and then the Office of Diversity is part of that as well. This is going to be the cabinet. She's going to be the one that is going to be, I think, lead on the Racial Equity Fund that the mayor's hoping to, I think, at least raise $10 million, potentially up to $50 million. And you know, her background is she worked in the city for some time.
In economic development, right?
Exactly. So I think she'd have a lot of insight in some of the issues we talked about. And then you know, has been working at MIT. I think was offered tenure and as well, and really working on urban planning and development. So really smart. I was joking with my wife the other day that, you know, I don't have to go to MIT to get an education from MIT now that she's there. So anyway, you guys will have a ball with her.
Thank you. Well, you threw me when you said chief. I was thinking about the woman who just got appointed in the police to head the police in the schools. And when you said chief, I was like, okay. All right, let's move on. Do we have, Nyla, yet technology working or not?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So my Wi-Fi connection is extremely poor right now. I can't get on video. I'm going to give you guys maybe a brief just overview of the primary public laws that you'll come into contact with as a commissioner. And then we'll have to do a training at a time where it makes more sense. Apparently Comcast just isn't working for me today. So does that sound like a plan, Commissioner McKenna and also Evandro?
So the question is, do we want to do it now or should we just wait? I guess what I would say here is, let me just suggest something, is 2 or 3 points from you. Several of us have been on public boards before. So and one of the things I brought up already today was, if in fact all of us have a piece of paper, then that paper has to be public and posted. So can you do the high 2 or 3 things that we need to do and are the things that we can't do, rather than real, you know, a training? Let's talk about those.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do that.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about the piece of paper, you were referring to really the intersection of the public records law and the open meeting law.
Yes.
Is that what you went through earlier?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, the public records law and the open meeting law are 2 of the primary bodies of public laws that relate to your role as a commissioner. And the third one is the conflict of interest law. So I'm going to just quickly tell you guys the purpose of each one, the requirements, and then we can do a more in-depth training. So I'll start with the conflict of interest law, which is controlled by Chapter 268A of the Massachusetts General Laws. And the purpose is simply to foster integrity and public service, to promote the public's trust, and to prevent conflicts between private interests and public duties. Really, it functions to suppress tendencies of wrongdoing, just as much as it functions to prevent giving the appearance of conflict of interest. And there are a lot of provisions in the law that are set up to disincentivize public officials from using their position for private gain. So
we all did a training. I'll just tell you, we all had to do a training before getting sworn in. Right, on conflict, right.
Okay, that is really good to know.
Yes.
So I would say the main takeaway from that training, and I want to emphasize that today, is that the biggest thing is disclose ahead of time if there are any facts, any circumstances, any situation that you might be aware of in which the city may have dealings with. As a commissioner, under the conflict of interest law, you are deemed an employee of the city. So the same rules that apply to me as someone who is, reporting to the city daily would apply to commissioners in terms of conflict of interest. So disclosing things ahead of time. And for you guys specifically, reaching out to Evandro or me and letting us know if you might be, if there may be a conflict or if there are any facts, doing that in writing is really important. So that's what I'll say about the conflict of interest law. In terms of the open meeting law, so that law is set up really just to eliminate any secrecy around the deliberations and the decisions on which public policy is based. By noticing the meeting today, you are taking a step in compliance with the open meeting law. It really requires that meetings are open for the public to attend, and there's notice given at least 48 hours before the meeting, and that minutes are kept. Minutes are kept by a member of the body and available upon request from any member of the public or anyone in general. I can go into more detail in a training on the type of meetings that are covered, what's considered a deliberation, when you actually are, essentially when you actually have to follow the requirements of the open meeting law. But the important thing here is that we have a system, and I think you guys have probably gone over this already. And just by me getting onto this meeting and having to go to PERC's website and seeing the meeting posted, I know that you guys are aware that the clerk's office is where all commissions and public bodies of the city post notice, and that's been accepted as the primary place for where any member of the public can go to find out whether or not a public meeting is going to be occurring within the city. One last thing about the open meeting law, there are a few topics or areas where if you guys need to discuss, there may be exceptions where you convene an executive session. Executive session doesn't relieve you from all of the requirements of the open meeting law, but what it does is say, for the purpose of this deliberation, the public or the public body can meet without the public being present. Meeting minutes are still kept, and they're available after a certain period of time, depending on the exception in which you enter into executive session for. But the idea is that, public's participation or even just the presence of the public may have some interference with the deliberation. So the law does make exceptions for certain topics and certain items for public bodies to discuss. And then the last thing, the public records law, that is pretty much a very extensive law that says, any record kept by a public official during their duties is presumed to be public unless an exception applies. Massachusetts has a very liberal and expansive view on public records. There are other places where it's the exact opposite of that, where you have to make the case for why something's a public record, but here we say everything is a public record unless there's an exception. For the city, we have, and I don't know if you guys have been introduced yet to Sean Williams, but he's our public records officer. He is the person who, if we ever receive, or if the commission ever receives a public records request, or anybody, any public body in the city receives one, we would be working with him to respond to the request in compliance with the public records law. One thing Commissioner McKenna just noted, and I also want to emphasize again, is that documents that are introduced in open meeting laws are essentially public records and should be kept static, meaning the document as it is introduced is the document that if a public records request is made, that the document's produced, even if it's a draft of an agreement that we will later finalize. If that draft is introduced into a meeting, that's the draft that is considered the public record and must be disclosed under the public records law.
So can I stop you there
that
for a
is-
minute? It's not only
Sure.
not only documents at a meeting, but it's documents sent out before a meeting or any time that go to all of the commissioners.
Documents introduced for a public meeting, yes. So that introduced for a public meeting, it is for, in anticipation of the public meeting,
Right.
during the meeting. Yep,
Before the
that's
meeting, anytime, right.
great question. And then, so when we receive a public records request, we have, I believe it's 10 days to respond to one, absent, an extension or any other reason that we would work out with the public records officer and the Massachusetts Secretary's office that deals or oversees and monitors. That oversees and monitors the public records law. So those are all more administrative in terms of the logistics and how we would process this. Again, that can come up later, but
Right.
it's 10 days. You have to respond. Everything is presumed to be a record. And then we can discuss the details at a later time. But those are the three, I would say, public laws that you need to be aware of. And then my last thing I want to say is, in a training, we'll discuss the parliamentary rules that we typically observe, or not just observe, but we use in our public body meetings for the city, and what it means to, as a commission, to take binding action, or how do you take binding action? Commissioner McKenna, I'm sure you're aware of them since you said most of you guys have been on public bodies, but we'll go through those again. And that's all I have for you guys.
Are there questions? No.
I just add, since we obviously went through this, not in order, but I didn't get a chance to introduce Nyla. Some of you may know her, obviously.
Oh,
She is an attorney for the law department, and the attorneys within the law department are assigned departments to work with that they advise, and the Human Rights Commission is assigned to Nyla. So Nyla has been a close partner since I started to try to help us get going. So that's why she was saying, if anything, we can go back to her as well, and she can help with further training.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you,
thank
Evandro.
you.
Yeah, I completely forgot that, but I'm here to advise you guys in your roles as commissioners in this public body. If anything comes up, me and Evandro are here.
Okay. Any questions? Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on. So I have a couple of comments at this point, which would be the typical sort of chair's report. And then go ahead, Ian.
I think we should approve the minutes from the
Yes.
last.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. This agenda got a little confused here, but it's the first thing I have. The approval of the minutes of the 30th of June. Are there any additions, corrections, omissions? Can I have a motion to approve?
This is Ben Goldberg. Just that there needs to be an addition of the time and the fact that it was held virtually, I think, are the only things that need to be added.
Okay.
5 p.m. and this meeting was held virtually due to COVID-19.
Okay, great. Anything else? Mission correction addition. Okay, with that notation agreed upon, can I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the minutes are accepted. Okay, so I just wanted to make a couple of comments. This is like both like the whole world in front of us, and trying to figure out where we can be have most impact is really a significant job for us. And the mayor was particularly interested in immigrant rights, so hearing about that today I think is important. And but one of the things I've thought of when I came into this was our role in terms of informing and education. Do the city agencies understand what the rights of immigrants are? I don't know. And the companies and landlords understand? You know, it's like, so that was one of my questions is, you know, is part of our job, and maybe talking to the new cabinet officer too, is making sure that the city, all the city representatives understand what immigrant rights are. And then moving on, you know, the larger world in terms of others, even outside of city agencies. So, Judge, you were going to say something here.
I was just questioning how much we understand immigrant rights.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. It's true. You know, what do we understand other rights, and what are we understand? You know, we heard today what some of the problems are, but you know, what rights do immigrants have, and where are the biggest problems with pursuing those rights? Because what we heard today was were issues that are much broader. Internet access for everybody, you know, food deserts, that's much broader. Check cashing, that's even much broader. So the wage issue is an issue which is predominantly immigrants, because they have nobody to complain to. They're really exploited, I think. But it's true. I mean, what do we know? What's our knowledge, and what do others know? Other people in the city agencies. And I say the same thing for all of these issues that would come before us. Like, throughout city government, there are people in almost every department and agencies who are responsible for whatever you want to call it, civil rights, anti-discrimination, harassment policies. And I wonder both how well trained they are, depending on agency to agency, and how much they share with each other, or do they even know each other? And do they learn from each other? Are there best practices that they learn from each other? Has there ever been any attempt to bring these people together? And I don't know. I mean, it's one of the questions I guess I asked Carolyn again, is this something maybe on her agenda to look at? You know, my experience has been that everybody's in a silo, and that one of the best ways is to learn best practices from other people who have been successful or failed in what they've tried to do. I mean, one of the things I hear all the time is, you know, anti-bias training for police, and except the research shows that it doesn't work. In fact, sometimes it has a backlash effect, and you know that the training that really works with police is much more on how to de-escalate a situation rather than anti-bias training. So, and I only have a couple more. Is like, also one of the areas that I don't think anybody ever talks about are the intermediaries in a geographical area that make a big difference, like search firms, like real estate agents, rental agencies, temp agencies. Do they in any way know the role that they play? I mean, search firms, I think they have one Rolodex, and in it are 4 people of color, the same 4 people of color that are, all of them have. But they seem to have a very hard time coming up with names of people of color, and often women. and it's an interesting situation because it's a logjam for a lot of high-level jobs and appointments. So, I mean, those intermediaries are sort of interesting. And what role, what is the role of a real estate agent in this area of housing discrimination? I mean, we think about landlords, but what about real estate agents? If somebody comes to a real estate agency and says, I want to rent out these 10 apartments, but I don't want to rent to anybody black. What is the responsibility of that real estate agent? Actually, the president of the Real Estate Association happens to live in my building. So he was sort of curious about, is there anybody around who could do training to real estate agents? So, and then housing, I'm curious about what the fair housing people are doing in the city. And just like with USEFI, is what role do we have? I'm curious about procurement. We've heard a lot about it. It hasn't moved very much in the city of Boston in terms of serving minority-owned businesses. So, I mean, there's a lot of areas, and also, as we mentioned last time, there's a police standards task force with Wayne Budd, who I noticed is having 4 or 5 hearings in the next couple of weeks, open hearings. And there's also the COVID healthcare task force, which, Evandro, do you know where that is? And is it going to end up with a set of recommendations?
I believe that's where they're going towards. In fact, the meeting that they had today, which I participated in, they have, gotten a consultant services of a local company, actually minority-owned businesses, to help them through the process, because they're going to keep going forward, and they want to come up with work product that's official. So that's, I think, where this task force is leading.
It's interesting to me because when hospitals want to build a building or do a merger, they have to agree to do certain community benefits.
Right.
And, that is a huge hook to make a significant difference in Black-owned businesses and in organizations that serve Black and brown people in underserved neighborhoods, in access to healthcare. And certainly we found through COVID that the disparity in terms of access to healthcare has made an enormous difference. So I'm curious as to what they will come up with, and is there anything that makes sense for us to be involved in? Again, it's like, where's our lane here that other people aren't doing that we could do and should do? So those were my wake up in the morning thoughts, or wait, think about it at night thoughts. Is, there's so many possibilities and so many issues about housing and wage discrimination, people with disabilities, what we're facing now in terms of evictions. I mean, going to make again, a big difference. So, and I don't know, again, where the holes are in terms of other people handling this. Is this something that we should be thinking about? So Evandro, do you have any comments in that regard?
Sure. I guess a couple points to go along what you were saying in terms of one lane and 2 gaps. One of the things that I've done even before this year is connect with MCAD, Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, because this is a lane that they occupy massively in the state of Massachusetts. And in fact, early on, I think late last year in the fall, I had a meeting with a couple of the commissioners and some senior staff. Actually, Nyla Freeman, who talked earlier, the lawyer, was there with me to just start a conversation with them to figure out what that lane is for us and what the gaps are. And most recently, 2 days ago, I actually called the chair of the MCAD, which is a woman by the name of Sunila Thomas George, and she expressed interest in coming to talk to the commission, so we at least have, again, a understanding of what space they occupy and what we can do to help. So that's one thing that I like to add in that regard. And again, last time we had Will Anoha, who is the Fair Housing and Equity Director. They also function as a commission. He's offered to help and come on board. So I think there's some key partners that in order for us to figure out what lane we occupy, that some people we need to hear from. And I think MCAD is key, and so is Fair Housing and Equity. And obviously we mentioned, Yusuf, you mentioned, and we all are aware now of new chief of Equity and Inclusion. So she's going to help us think about the space we can occupy. And within that equity and inclusion, there are other departments. So I guess to an extent, we can think about how do our work add value as a whole to this new equity and inclusion chief and cabinet position as well. So that's a couple of things that I want to put in your radar. And finally, as someone, obviously as a staff member who's been almost a year on this, I want to find this time to sort of put some things in the radar that we can discuss, that you're aware of, that's happening on a daily basis. For instance, one of the things that I neglected to mention last time was that, the FY 2021 budget passed, and, we have over $500,000 that was invested in this department. So, as we think about our mission and our priorities, we should also think about, how do we build capacity to serve the people of the city of Boston, right? I can tell you, for instance, I've had complaints so-called, but people contacting the office either through the city's website or an email or call trying to access us. And, I think one of the things we should think about, even as we think about priorities and mission, is an intake, a basic intake that tells us what are we starting to see from people. So those are some key things that I think, as we meet, I like to sort of take this opportunity to kind of, put some thoughts behind some things that can move us forward beyond just the agenda as well, right? Because we want to start thinking about the daily basis and what that looks like. And, obviously myself and Susan have been thinking about some of these issues. That's all I had.
So as we just to make it clear, so you said from the beginning, and I think I'm talking to the mayor and to Joyce Lenihan about this, and to John Toll and others, is we do not want to become a reactive commission waiting for people to bring us a complaint.
Right.
And what I'm hoping we can do as a group is to find areas. And when I think about hiring people, I think about researchers, data people, and writers, as opposed to investigators who can, when we say, review the Trust Act, people go out, know what the Trust Act is, see what already exists. I mean, I'm just using that as an example. Or food deserts. Are there food deserts? Where are the food deserts? Right. Is there something we can do? I mean, so much more than any individual complaint. And I've said to Evandro before, if people come in, we should send them to the right places, make sure they get served, but it's not our job to manage individual complaints. So, but I'm interested in your reaction to anything you heard, and also any visceral reaction to say, okay, we should be doing this, or we should be doing this next. It's a lot, and we've got to pick a few things, and there are other things. There are a few things going on. There's the police, there's Wayne Budd doing the police standard stuff and looking at. Plus, in the state legislature, the Senate has already passed legislation.
Right.
It's going to the House.
Yep.
That takes into effect almost the 4 hearings that Wayne Budd's group is doing are covered in the state legislation. So that's one thing that sort of, it melds together. And the COVID health task force is another one. What are they going to come out with as well? Particularly those 2 things impact, I think, what we're talking about. But I also think, there are issues like the police in the schools, where we can actually be helpful to move the issues along as they go. But we can't do everything. And that's why I ask you if there are things particularly that you think we should be doing. And then secondly, we want to go and say, who are the next, and I want Evandro and Susan to make sure you share and post the list of people and organizations that everybody sent in, because we need to do that. Is your suggestion about sort of next steps in how we narrow this down and where you think we can make the most difference? So I'd like to hear from the commissioners about your thoughts about that.
One of the things that was raised, the food desert.
Yeah.
I think we really do need to look at that. As I've gotten older, I'm fortunate to have a car.
Right.
Go get groceries. But this COVID has sort of emphasized to me how important it is to have a store that's within a short distance where you live. And so I think that's one of the things we should look at and advocate behind, making sure that all communities have access to healthy food.
Reasonably priced, healthy food.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Yeah, I actually was really surprised to hear that. I don't think about Boston as a place with food deserts, but I think it's something we should find out if it's, where it's true and how much of it, how bad the situation is.
It's not just food, it's recreational facilities. And,
well, that I'm not so surprised about.
Yeah.
Green spaces. I saw an article about that recently too. I think it was in the Globe about
green spaces. Yeah.
Impacting primarily communities of color.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
And with the development going on, the open land is disappearing very quickly.
Yeah.
What I would be interested in knowing if this body has interest in calling some experts on immigrants in Boston and Massachusetts to speak up of the issues that are coming out on behalf of the immigrants themselves, because that we are not going to be able to do. But we could select groups or individuals representing broad coalitions of immigrants from all over within Boston.
Yeah.
And get a sense of what the most important issues that we could act on are.
Right. And they may be some of the ones we've already heard about, or they may be different. Like Mira and other groups like that.
Yeah, they're very interested.
Yeah.
There are a couple of them. Mira is one of them.
Yeah.
Bijan is another one of them that are very interested in, because immigrants will not
come forward.
No.
Yeah. I think that would be important and educational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Other thoughts here in terms of Ben?
Yeah, I do think that it's very important that we do a fair amount of listening before we decide on what some of these priorities are. And I've been trying to think of a process for funneling and narrowing, because I bet we get a lot of great, I mean, there are a lot of really interesting, great ideas, but I think we really do need a process to funnel. But I agree with what you said, Madam Chair, about the sort of skill sets of the people that we're going to need, because I think that no matter, so we picked 3, 4, however many things to focus on. Yeah, you're going to need skilled writers and researchers, so that maybe we have a few public hearings. We bring in some companies from whatever industry it is that that we decided to focus on. But then, what of it? You know, I mean, you have a hearing and it's in the news cycle for a day, but that's not useful long term. The useful thing would be some sort of report and recommendations that come out of that, and somebody's got to do the hard work of drafting all that. So I think that that's something for Evandra to think about in terms of a staffing plan.
Yeah, I totally agree. That skill set is, you know, research, data analysis, and writing often goes together.
But I think you can start trying to staff and find those people on a parallel track,
Yeah,
even if it's going to take us a few more meetings to really hone in on, okay, for whatever remains of 2020 and for 2021, we want to focus on these 4 priorities. You know, we should make sure that those staff are in place.
Right. Have those skills. Yeah. And the other thing, you know, Ben, when we talk about this is, you know, you do hearings and you do research and gather research and write a report and make recommendations. I think one of the things with a standing commission as opposed to a task force is we're going to continue to be in existence. So unlike COVID task force on health, we're not going away. So after we make the recommendations, you know, one of the things we can commit to do is continue to follow up on those recommendations with the people we're making them to, and to follow up with whoever they're made to, privately, publicly, and keep up. And that's the difference between a task force and a commission.
Yeah.
Right? Is that we make a recommendation, we stick with it. Find out, and if we can't make it happen, we find out why. So I think that's important.
So that's why I brought the budget up and started talking about staffing, because as we're discussing the focus and the priorities, you know, when we get to it, it's going to take us some time to hire individuals, right? It took me several months to hire Susan. So that's why I'm putting it up there that, you know, maybe we should think about, as if we're going to focus on systematic issues, who do we need, right? Who do we need to fill those positions? One of the things, people that I can tell you, I would love to have right now is someone that's going to focus on communications. I mean, right now we have a meeting, a public meeting that we put it on not Facebook, but obviously on the city's website. But there's a lot more we could have done to communicate to the public, right? In fact, we talked about briefly last time about putting a press conference. We have meetings not press conference. I keep saying press conference. I meant press release. We could have put something out to say to the public that now in August, these meetings are happening, right? On every 2 weeks. So communication is critical, I think, right now, as we think about coming out the gate. How do we brand ourselves? Do we have a Twitter account or do we don't? Like, how do we communicate with people is something that is keeping me up at night, because I think that we can have a lot more people, there's a lot more people interested in the work that we're doing. If we're going to listen to people and have public comments, we should find different ways to reach people. So that's another person. But again, this is why I brought it up, because I need some of these pieces to start falling along with our general discussion so that we can get to the work as well, to produce reports, to do potentially a survey. However we're going to function, we're going to need capacity to execute those things.
Who else wants to comment here? Anne, you want to offer something up here? I feel like I'm a school teacher calling on people who didn't put their hand up.
Well, I
I
think,
come from a family of teachers. You know, my parents were both school teachers, so you know it's in the blood here.
it's okay. I think communication is very important. As when we were talking earlier about the issues that are going on for the immigrant community, it seems like we have to rebuild some trust.
Yeah.
Especially with, you know, what happened with ICE and Boston Public Schools. So I think it would be very important to let people know that we exist, that we're here. And as Ben said, we do some listening to see what the issues really are. Because the work that, if we're going to pick 4 issues, I want to make sure we're picking 4 issues that are going to have the most impact in people's lives. And so I think it's very important that we listen to other people, we communicate that we're here, and we try to rebuild some of that trust.
All right, who else? Anyone else? So I think I agree communications is essential, but I want to make sure we know what we're communicating. I don't want to like raise our hand and say, we're here, and people start coming to us and we're like, oh, no, we don't do that, we don't do that, and we don't do that. So I want to make sure we're clear about what we do and we don't do. What I heard tonight, and let me say what I think I heard, and then you tell me if, sometimes when you're talking, you're not listening well, so please tell me if, what I heard is a couple of suggestions about maybe having someone come in from the immigrant community, an organization or two. And I think we heard last time too, from the fair housing people that they would like to come, and because they have a similar role, I don't know how similar, because I don't know what their legislation or ordinance looks like. Can they call hearings? Can they subpoena people? What is it they do? I think they're more like, I don't know how much authority they have, but it would be interesting to have not only their executive director, but a couple of board members. It would be interesting to meet together, I think, what we can learn from them about what worked and what didn't work for them. It would, I think learning more about food deserts, I think that, you know, I was at a meeting, a Zoom meeting, of course, about listening to someone talk about the opportunity for students to take courses anywhere in the Commonwealth. Right? And she assumed that everyone in the Commonwealth had access to high-performing internet. And I was like, you know, where did you get that idea, you know? Is that, I mean, people don't have broadband, and even people who have some broadband have very low strength broadband. So I still think that's something that should be on our agenda. And if Anne's out on maternity leave, there's probably someone else that we can talk to. Okay. And I can get my volunteer to talk to. My volunteer. Yeah, that you could work with Mike to see what we can find out. So does that sound reasonable if we have somebody from the fair housing people maybe and Mirror and someone other organization talk about immigrant issues and continue to look about this internet accessibility, or put it in some other order? I am open. As we say, we want to listen, before we choose. I think Ben is absolutely right. And it's hard to communicate who we are until we sort of have a better idea of how we're going to operate. But I'm open to other suggestions or other priorities. Or does that sound reasonable?
Sounds good. Sounds good. The only other one I would add, I think it's the MCAD as well, to just get a sense from them, you know, what they're doing. I think it helps us understand the gap in the lane that could potentially. That's
Well,
the only one.
MCAD, there is not a gap or a lane with MCAD. There's not. We either send our stuff to them or we don't.
Right. No, what I'm saying is, as we are thinking about what I've heard over the past couple meetings, the 2 meetings we had, is that we want to not duplicate work.
Right.
We want to add value and find a lane that we can be sort of unique in a sense, right?
Right.
Not do what the other city departments are doing.
Right.
Other task force. So I just, particularly because the ordinance itself mentions the MCAD so much, that I thought, okay, we should come in, and I know obviously you are, and so am I, and others are familiar with MCAD, but that we get a chance to kind of get an overview of the spaces that they are in that maybe we can collaborate on, or maybe even if it's just talking about sending them cases, right?
Right.
Do we get, what does that look like?
Right, and I think at some point that would be helpful. As we know, they do individual complaints.
Right.
That is their lane.
Right.
And that is what they do. They don't do pattern and practice. They don't do class actions. They do handle individual complaints one by one. And they don't even do class actions, which is sort of interesting, unless they've changed. I don't know, maybe they've changed.
One of the things we can do is ask them, have they seen certain patterns that we might want to?
Absolutely. I asked Evandro that, a couple of weeks ago is, can we find out from MCAD what their complaints from Boston look like in terms of a pattern or practice, right? Are they from the African American community, the Latinx community? Are they from the gay community, the disabilities community? That would give us information. I think that would be very useful for us to know.
Okay.
I do. Yeah, I do. Because that would help us understand the issues in Boston. So let's see who we, if we look at fair housing and we look at a couple of the immigrant groups and maybe MCAD, that would be a very full meeting. So let's see who we can get and who makes sense. And let's continue to see what we can find out about internet access. And, here's the kind of thing, if you had a researcher, Susan, you can be a researcher, find out about food deserts. I want you to go around and see if you can buy food everywhere. He mentioned somebody that had done some work on food deserts, I think.
Yeah, I quickly Googled and I found an article that said that there are only 2 census tracts in Boston that met the USDA definition of food desert. So there are definitely people that have tried to map this.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is not, you start from the beginning, that's for sure.
Yeah.
There's somebody that has done this, and maybe Susan and Evandro, you can find that information out for us. It may be an issue, but it's not as big an issue as it is in a lot of other places. That's not saying it's not an issue. Maybe it's a big issue in a small portion, but one that's more easily solved too. So let's find out what we're talking about. And Susan and Evandro, why don't you see who I think he mentioned.
We'll follow up on that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk. I'll follow up with you, Sophie, and
okay, great.
We'll do some digging.
Okay. All right. Have we done enough for the night? For the evening? You have? I want you to know the last time, at the last meeting 2 weeks ago, my 15-month-old granddaughter was watching, we were on television. My son put her on television and she started to cry because Grammy did not wave at her when she waved. So she was like, she was like crying and crying and crying because this is Grammy Signs television. It was like, why isn't she waving at us? So anyway, I thought that was a great a great ending here. So if any of you need to wave at anybody, feel free. If you need to wave at somebody, it's perfectly fine. You can wave, it's okay. All right, so is there a motion to adjourn?
Before we
public
finish
comment.
up,
Sorry, public comments.
Public comments.
Public comments. Here I am, like, okay. Do we have any public comments? Have anything in the chat? I have some comments, but not questions. I don't even have who's here because all I can get is who's on the panel.
So we do have Haroon here. He's raising his hand. So Haroon, you have 2 minutes and I will give you a 30-second warning. You should be able to unmute yourself.
If you remember correctly, Arun was here last time as well, and was trying to speak.
Had the same problem.
And I'm trying to unmute him.
I am also.
Let me try.
It should be. He should be there. He's unmuted.
Are you there, Arun? It's Arun.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can. I just promoted him to panelists to see if that could help him.
And we should be able to see all the participants, and we cannot.
Yeah.
All we can see is the panelists.
Right. So
and now Haroon, but we can't see anybody else. I mean, there are other people who are here with us, but we don't know who they are. So next time, let's figure out how we can make sure that we can see everybody who's joined us. Okay.
Yeah. So if you click on attendees, you can see the names of the people listed. On the other side, you see. So one side you have panelists.
I see. Okay. All right.
So there you can see there's a woman named Cynthia.
Yeah, I see it. I see it. Okay. I got it. Okay. Haroon. He's still muted.
I know.
So, Arun, if I may briefly, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I can explain a little bit about Arun because I've met with him in the past.
Oh, okay.
You can see in his comment in the chat.
Yeah.
That he's part of the Crispus Attucks,
right,
Boston organization.
Yeah.
We have some initiatives to get the word out about him, and they essentially met with me asking for help. And I said, and at that point, actually, I think the commissioners were not appointed. I said, let me get the commission going. Then, hopefully they can listen to your proposal and figure out whether we, what we do or not do, I guess.
Right.
More or less, I think that's what.
That's what that's what the comments are about.
Right.
Okay.
That's what the comments are. Right. So he mentioned the monuments.
Right.
A statue near City Hall there.
Right.
That was about the Boston Massacre and the fact it did not have this gentleman's name. His involvement as a revolutionary man back then, and he's a black man, by the way.
Yeah.
In case some of you are not familiar with Crispus.
I've read about him, Crispus Attucks.
Right. So that's obviously, I think he looks like he's gone. So, but I want to flag it for you.
Are there any other questions, comments? There's nothing else in the chat, and I don't see anybody else with a hand raised. So.
Right, so folks.
All right, so why don't we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The meeting is adjourned. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
We'll
Thank
see
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.